The Emperor has been silent for 10,000 years, but his most fanatical sons still fight as if he gave the order yesterday. Somewhere out there in the dark, between the stars, black armored knights are still killing and dying for a vow sworn above his broken body, still marching as if the holy war never ended, because to them, it never has. 1,000 years after that vow was sworn, the warrior who first spoke it fell in single combat aboard a captured ship, and his body was returned to his brothers as a grim proclamation. But because the oath outlived the man, the war he started has never once been set down. This is the story of the men in black armor who still carry that vow, and of a matter no imperial scholar has ever been truly willing to state in the open. For 100 centuries, this brotherhood has broken the sacred Codex Astartes, turned away young aspirants other chapters would have preserved, and maintained numbers that almost certainly exceed what imperial law permits a single chapter to possess. And because no power in the galaxy has ever truly stopped them, the question is not whether they broke the rules, the question is why no one made them obey. Their fleet appears from warp routes no imperial navigator should have survived, plants its banners on a burning world, and is gone again before any formal record of the campaign can be logged. Where other chapters file their assembly rolls and their deployment orders with the proper authorities, this brotherhood does not. Imperial records on their true strength remain incomplete, fragmented across centuries of scattered campaigns, and the scholars who know the most about them are the ones who would have written the least. Because of that first vow, their strange customs, their unmatched heroes, their unbending commitment to close quarters combat, and their place in the fractured Imperium of the 41st millennium all connect into one story. What emerges is the portrait of a brotherhood that is less a chapter than a living holy war of faith, a sword of mankind that has never once been sheathed. Yet before the oath, before the fleet, before the black cross on the white field, there was a ruined world, a dying emperor, and a son whose fire his own father feared. Chapter 1. Born of Fire and Oath. The origins of the chapter cannot be spoken of without first recalling the disaster that birthed them. As Codex Black Templars records, and as the Horus Heresy Chronicles describe in painful detail, the final embattled years of that great rebellion saw the traitor War Master lead half the Emperor's own legions against their father. The defense of Terra itself was entrusted to the Imperial Fists and their Primarch, Rogal Dorn. Stoic, disciplined, and fiercely responsible, Dorn was the master of sieges, the Praetorian of the Golden Throne, the builder of the walls on which humanity's last hope rested. His warriors mirrored him in flesh and ceramite, patient, practical, and bound to the craft of defenses and endurance. And yet, among the armored saints who held those walls, one man burned hotter than any of them. That man was Sigismund, first captain of the Imperial Fists, and his own Primarch did not entirely trust what burned behind his eyes. The first captain had been marked as different from the earliest days of the Great Crusade, where his brothers reflected Dorn's quiet, iron-hard temper. He burned with a fire the Primarch found troubling. He was a duelist without equal, a warrior who actively hunted the enemy's mightiest champions and struck them down one by one in single combat. During the final battle on Terra, clad in the black armor Dorn had granted him as Emperor's champion, he stood upon the walls of the Imperial Palace and cut down traitor after traitor, champions of the Sons of Horus, the Emperor's children, the Death Guard, the World Eaters, until his name became a word for divine retribution itself. By the time the Master of Mankind was placed forever within the Golden Throne, his belief in his father's divinity had hardened into something absolute and unshakable. That conviction, loud and public, placed him at open odds with the Praetorian. The Primarch, ever the practical man, rejected the worship of his father. He insisted the Emperor was a being of reason and science, not a god to be prayed to. His first captain could not and would not be moved. The rift between master and son passed into legend among the surviving Imperial Fists, whispered with unease. And when Rebuta Gilman's Codex Astartes decreed that the vast legions be broken apart into smaller chapters of roughly 1,000 warriors each, the Praetorian of Terra refused outright. What turned his refusal into a grudging yes was not reason, but a catastrophe so close to renewed civil war that the Imperium nearly tore itself in half a second time. Only after years of bitter disagreement, the disastrous Iron Cage assault against Perturbo's Iron Warriors, and the near catastrophe of the Imperial Navy firing on the Imperial Fist's own strike cruiser Terrible Angel, an event that threatened open war between the chapters and the fleet, did Dorn at last give way. When he did so heavily, and he did so in a way that would echo across 10,000 years. The Master of Sieges decreed that the Imperial Fist would split, and that his most loyal, most devoted, and most spiritually difficult son would lead the new chapter that bore the old colors of his personal vow. That Brotherhood took the black of the first captain's Terran armor as its heraldry, the cross pate as its holy sign, and a single unbroken oath as its founding law. These warriors were not born from careful politics, they were born from fire, from loss, and from the unquenchable faith of a man who could not allow the war against the Emperor's enemies to ever truly end. In the moment the Black Knight knelt before his Primarch and swore to carry the fight into the farthest stars, the Eternal Crusade was born. It has not paused for one single day in the 10 millennia since. Every battle brother who dons the black armor today is, in the truest sense, a direct inheritor of that first vow. Yet an oath is only ever as strong as the warrior who first spoke it, and the one who spoke this vow did not pass quietly into the rest. He fell aboard a captured ship by the hand of the very war master who would go on to plague the Imperium for the next 10,000 years. What the founder became in that final hour, and what his brothers did with what remained of him, is a story that should never have ended the way it did. Chapter 2. The First High Marshal. Of all the heroes of the Adeptus Astartes, few cast a shadow as long. This was a warrior who unsettled the very Primarch who led him. To the Imperial Fist during his lifetime, he had been a troubling saint, a man whose faith made his father by gene uneasy even as his blade saved their lives. To his crusading sons, he became a god king in flesh, a founder whose words and deeds are still quoted on the battlefields of the 41st millennium, whose armor is still worshipped as a relic, and whose final resting place serves as the Brotherhood's spiritual heart. His life spanned four of the most important events in all of human history, and his end marked the moment the Black Templars truly became their own, answerable only to the memory of their founder and the silent god on his throne. The young Sigismund had been a Terran-born warrior, orphaned during the Unification Wars, and raised in the refugee camps of the Ionis Plateau before his elevation into the Imperial Fist. He rose swiftly, marked out not merely by his skill at arms, but by a certainty of purpose that seemed almost prophetic. Long before the heresy broke openly, he and a handful of other far-sighted Astartes were warned by the warp-touched saint Euphrates Keeler that treachery brewed inside the legions themselves. Where others call such warnings madness, the future founder listened. The knowledge darkened him into something colder and harder than he had been, more willing to see the enemy behind the brother's smile, and that willingness to believe the unbelievable would save Terra more than once in the years to come. His reputation as a swordsman had become an odd whisper during the Great Crusade. It was during campaigns alongside the World Eaters in the dueling cages of that region's flagship that he earned the name which followed him forever, the Black Knight, after trading blows with the assault captain Karn himself. When the War Master at last raised his standard against the throne, the first captain fought in countless actions during the long retreat to Terra, striking down champions on a dozen worlds. It was at the final siege of the home world that his legend set into eternal stone. Clad in the black armor his Primarch had ordered for him when he was named the first chosen of the Master of Mankind, his heraldry turned from Imperial Fist gold to the color that would one day mark an entire chapter. He walked out beyond the walls of the Imperial Palace and issued open challenges to the greatest warriors of the traitor legions. He struck them down one by one. By the end of that siege, Rogal Dorn had named him the first Emperor's Champion, a title that has now been carried, unbroken, for 100 years. Through the centuries that followed the heresy, as the Second Founding broke the legions into chapters, the first High Marshal refused to set down his arms. He led his newly formed brotherhood not into a fortress monastery, but directly into the void. Their home would be the fleet. Their ground would be whatever battlefield waited beyond the next warp jump. He swore the great vow that has defined the Holy War ever since, that his warriors would march on until the last enemy of man was dust, that they would never retreat, that they would never negotiate with heretics or Xenos, and they would never falter in the task their founder had set them. The Eternal Crusade was sworn in that moment not as a policy, but as a sacrament. For more than 1,000 years, the old warrior waged that war, standing watch, above all, over the Cadian Gate, convinced that Horus's surviving sons would one day return from the Eye of Terror to plague the Imperium once more. Imperial officials called him paranoid. They called him an aging zealot. They said his watch on the gate was a relic's obsession. He was proven correct when Abaddon the Despoiler launched the first Black Crusade. The traitor's fleet sought out the Eternal Crusader itself, hunting the founder who had stood against them since Terra. Sigismund met the Despoiler in single combat one last time. One of them walked away from that duel with a wound that would never close. The other did not walk away at all. By then, over 1,000 standard years old, and ravaged by time, the Black Knight still met the War Master of Chaos blade to blade. Age had not dulled him. As Codex Black Templars records, he drove the Black Sword into his enemy and dealt a blow so grievous that the scar would remain on the Despoiler for the next 10,000 years. Yet the Talon of Horus, the ancient weapon forged and Primarchs that the Despoiler bore, proved the decider of that duel, and the founder fell at last, defiant to his final breath. His last words have been preserved in Brotherhood memory as a curse on all traitors, that Abaddon would die as his father had died, soulless, honorless, weeping, and ashamed. His body was returned by the Despoiler himself, delivered aboard a captured Templar frigate as a dark proclamation of the long war to come. In time, it was laid in a sarcophagus of black marble aboard the flagship. From that moment on, every High Marshal has sworn his oath over the Founder's tomb, and every Emperor's champion has been anointed in the shadow of that long, silent king. In passing into legend, he became what he had refused in life to be called, a saint, a patron, and an eternal presence whose name still ignites the faith of every warrior in the chapter. And yet, a saint alone does not make an army. What grew in the centuries after his death was a brotherhood so strangely ordered, so openly defiant of imperial law, that even the Adeptus Astartes themselves do not quite know how to measure it, or how to stop it. Chapter 3. The Eternal Crusade Unbound. Picture a warp-torn system on the edge of the Imperium. A fleet drops out of the Imperium under guidance no Imperial navigators should have survived. There is no home world for these warriors to return to. There never was. Their home is the fleet that carried them here, and it has come to deliver fire and judgment to the world below. Above the assembled warships, flagship-sized, sails the Eternal Crusader. The background articles of Codex Chapter Approved describe her as a cathedral, armory, and apothecarion all at once. And if you want to know why these warriors frighten even other space marines, you could do worse than start there. Her decks are lined with shrines to fallen heroes, reliquaries holding weapons of legend, and the sacred tomb of the founder himself. She is a battle barge and a cathedral and apothecarion at the same time. Around her move strike cruisers and escorts that function as mobile chapels, armories, and forged temples. When this war host ventures into a new war zone, its fleet is its home, its court, and its holy ground. Ask an Imperial Fist officer where his chapter lives, and he will name a world. Ask a Black Templar, and he will point out the stars. A voice rolls around the fleet's vox. Unlike in other chapters, it does not belong to a chapter master of the standard codex structure, because this brotherhood has never possessed one. It belongs to a marshal, and he commands the campaign to make planetfall. Somewhere else in the galaxy, above him, stands the High Marshal, the supreme commander of the entire brotherhood, and direct successor of the founder. That figure inherits the role not through simple election, but through a blend of proven battlefield command, spiritual authority, and the quiet recognition of his brothers. He wields absolute power over where the Eternal Crusade goes next, deciding which worlds will be saved, which heresies will be hunted, and which distant cries for aid will be answered. Beneath the High Marshal serve the Marshals, each leading a war host of his own, and beneath them the Castellans, veteran officers who serve as battlefield commanders and lieutenants within each crusade. The Reclusiarch, chief of the chaplains, stands as the spiritual voice of the whole chapter and traditionally guards the preservation of its relics, banners, and oaths. The Marshal of the Eternal Crusader, commander of the flagship and keeper of the Founder's Tomb, holds a unique and deeply respected seat, a position of immense prestige within the Brotherhood, bound to the flagship and the Founder's Tomb. Yet what a war host actually is, under these warriors, is something other chapters cannot quite stomach. As Codex Black Templars sets out in its opening pages, where other brotherhoods are organized into 10 neatly numbered companies of precisely 100 battle brothers each, Sigismund's heirs recognize no such limit. Theirs is organized instead into crusades, independent war hosts that vary widely in size and purpose, each led by a marshal, each dispatched across the galaxy on campaigns that may last decades, centuries, or in some cases, entire millennia. A single such force may number a mere 100 warriors hunting a single heretical warlord, or it may swell to thousands of Astartes waging total war across a whole sector. There is no fixed template, only the vow that binds it and the marshal who commands it, which brings up a figure the Inquisition has never quite wanted to pin down. No one outside the Brotherhood can say with certainty how many of them exist at any given time, for their warriors are scattered across dozens of these formations in every corner of the galaxy. Imperial observers have long suspected that a single major campaign can number in the thousands, a figure that would be a flagrant, open breach of the Codex Astartes were it ever formally acknowledged. This raises a matter the Holy Ordos have never quite been willing to address in the open. Disciplining a brotherhood that likely outnumbers the force required to bring it to heel has proven impossible across the centuries. The chapter avoids such scrutiny through constant movement and geographic spread, and the Holy Ordos have learned, sometimes through painful lessons, that confronting these knights over their numbers is work for the brave and the foolish alone. Lord Commander Guilliman himself has, in the current age, chosen not to force the issue into open conflict, not because he approves of the Brotherhood's defiance, but because the galaxy is too deeply wounded to afford the loss of so many of humanity's finest warriors. On the world below the fleet, a young recruit stands in a circle of torchlight beside the veteran brother who has taught him everything. His drills, his prayers, the first names of their fallen. This is the neophyte system, and it is how these warriors are made. Every aspirant is bounded directly to an initiate who serves as both mentor and master, teaching him combat, teaching him the chapter's prayers, teaching him the oaths that bind brother to brother. The two of them fight side by side in Crusader squads, the mixed formations of power-armored veterans and scout-armored recruits that form the signature tactical unit of the chapter. Only after a neophyte has earned enough honor in battle, typically by performing some specific heroic deed a chaplain deems worthy, is he fully raised to the ranks of the initiates. In time, he in turn will take a neophyte of his own. The chain of mentorship extends back generation by generation, binding every current Templar through an unbroken line of masters and students to the founders themselves. This is not merely an organizational preference, it is a deliberate choice, so that every warrior inherits not only skill, but memory, not only training, but faith from those who came before. Now imagine those brothers pouring out their fleet onto a burning world. The horn calls, the banners rise, and across 100 other warplanes, 100 other war hosts are doing the same thing, right now, simultaneously, in an orchestrated war that has not once paused in 10,000 years. Structure alone, however, cannot explain the terrible singularity of these knights. To stand within their ranks is to live and serve within a creed so fierce, so all-consuming, that even other Space Marines regard it with a quiet unease that has more than once in recorded history slipped into open fear. Chapter 4. zealots of the Imperial Creed. The night before a major engagement, the fleet's cloisters fall silent, and in that silence, you can hear exactly what these warriors believe. Picture the scene. The chaplains stand at the head of the assembled brothers, and the vigil matters because it shapes how they will fight when the doors finally open. Hundreds of Templars kneel in the darkened chapel decks of a battle barge, armor scraped clean, weapons laid out before them on strips of crimson cloth. A priest's voice rises, carrying a litany that has been sung in halls like these on dozens of different flagships for 10,000 years. Every warrior within earshot listens not as a soldier listens to an officer, but as a commoner might listen to a saint. And in that moment, you can hear what faith sounds like when it has been sharpened to a blade. Belief is the true engine of these warriors. Where other chapters speak of duty, honor, or gene-sown loyalty to a distant Primarch, the sons of Sigismund speak of faith, absolute, burning, and without compromise. To them, the Master of Mankind is not merely a great leader of the distant past, nor even a being of unmatched power who once walked among his children. He is a living god, enthroned upon Terra, the architect of humanity's destiny, and the rightful ruler of the stars. Every battle they fight is a holy act. Every enemy they strike down is, by definition, a heretic in his sight. Every wound they suffer on an alien world is an offering to the Golden Throne. This is not doctrine the way other chapters mean doctrine. It is bone and marrow, and you do not argue a Black Templar out of his faith so much as you bury him in it. The vigil continues. The priests move among the kneeling brothers, their Crosius Arcana as likely to be used in ceremony as in open combat, their words carrying authority no marshal will lightly challenge. The Reclusium walks a fine line between officer corps and prophetic order. Many of the most storied figures in chapter history rose through the priesthood rather than through the command ranks, and it is no accident that the present age's most beloved hero, Grimaldus of Helsreach, is himself a Reclusiarch. Now an aspirant is brought forward. He is young, raw, pulled from one of the war-torn worlds the fleet has just passed through. He has passed his trials of blade and will, and in the quiet, a priest lays a hand on his forehead and watches his eyes. What the chaplain is looking for is what these brothers call the mark, the quiet, telltale flicker of psychic potential. If that presence is detected, the aspirant will never take up the armor of a librarian. In this brotherhood, that path ends there. They have no psyker brothers. Codex Black Templars is unusually blunt on this point, and so are the chaplains who carry that doctrine into the field. They do not recruit psychers, they do not train them, and they regard the warp with a loathing that is close to visceral. To them, the Imperium is the home of demons, of heretics, and of mutants. Any power drawn from it, no matter how carefully disciplined, no matter how strong the hood, or how pious the bearer, is tainted at its source. When aspirants show war potential during the trials of recruitment, they do not enter the chapter as librarians. The stance has repeatedly put the Templars at odds with other imperial institutions, and there is little sign that they will ever bend on it. For a son of Sigismund, the warp is the enemy, and an enemy is not a thing to be harnessed. Back in the vigil, the litany grows louder. Battle brothers begin to swear their oaths, not vague pledges of courage, but specific, binding contracts of action. A Templar may swear to strike down a particular enemy warlord by name, to be first to breach a particular wall, to retrieve a particular relic from the foe's hands, to stand unmoving before a particular battlefield, regardless of the cost. The breaking of such a vow is unthinkable, and the keeping of one is celebrated as a sacred triumph that earns its fulfillment a place in the chapter's living history. After the battle, those pledges that were kept are recorded in vast tomes called the Books of Honor, and those that were kept only through the ultimate sacrifice of their swearer are inscribed in these separate books of sacrifice, volumes that, in their own way, are considered even more holy than the first. And in the quiet hours between battles, the fleet does not rest. It prays. Their daily life is plain, strictly ordered, and utterly given over to the service of their war. Luxury has no place aboard their vessels. Ornamentation, when it exists at all, is devoted entirely to matters of faith. Icons of the Master of Mankind, the cross-patay of Dorn's sons, the laurels and preserved remains of valorous dead. Their cloisters ring with the chants of battle brothers at prayer, and their training halls thunder with the clash of blades from dawn to dawn. For by the fleet's internal reckoning, there is no night. They are monks in power armor, knights of a dead age reborn in ceramite, and they walk through the galaxy with the certainty of men who believe, truly and completely, that they are the Emperor's own wrath made flesh. This is not arrogance, it is something older and simpler, and far more dangerous. Absolute conviction, carried into battle by warriors whose skill matches their belief. Such conviction would amount to mere blind faith in lesser warriors. In the hands of these knights, it has been welded to 10,000 years of martial tradition, and the way they fight, when the distance finally closes, has no equal anywhere in the Imperium, not even close. Chapter 5. The Black Sword Doctrine. In every major engagement, there comes a single moment when the enemy commander, if he has faced these warriors before, stops giving orders, for he has just watched a Templar line break into the charge, and has quietly admitted, only to himself, that the battle is already lost. That is the soul of how these knights fight. In battle, the Brotherhood is overwhelming. Their preferred method of warfare is the close quarters assault, the relentless, crushing charge that brings ceramite-clad warriors into direct contact with the enemy line. Range fire has its place in their weapons. Bolters, heavy weapons, and armored vehicles are all present in abundance, yet the soul of their tactics lies in the moment when the distance closes to a blade's length, and the chainswords begin to sing. This preference is reinforced at every level of the chapter, from the composition of Crusader squads, with their mix of bolt-wielding veterans and pistol and blade recruits, to the venerated assault formations and land raider columns that smash through enemy lines to deliver warriors directly to the heart of the foe. To these knights, the only truly honorable victory is the one won within arm's reach, and the only truly decisive battle is the one decided by the sword. At the apex of that martial tradition stands a single right, and it is the one all other details have been leaning towards. Codex Black Templars devotes an entire section to it, and with good reason. When a war host prepares for a major engagement, the chaplains hold a night-long vigil of prayer and meditation, drawing the whole force into a single extended act of spiritual preparation. During this vigil, one battle brother among them is said to be visited by visions, a calling, subtle or overwhelming, that marks him as chosen for the coming fight. He rises from the vigil transformed, humbled, exalted, and bound to lead his brothers into the teeth of the enemy. He is then clad in armor older than most human kingdoms, handed a sword whose maker no living Templar can name, and sent forth to meet his fate. The chosen warrior is clad in the armor of faith, a sacred suit of artificer-forged power armor passed down through the ages, and armed with the black sword, an ancient two-handed greatsword of lusterless black metal, whose true provenance is unknown even to the chapter's own lore keepers, yet whose edge has never dulled across 100 centuries of holy war. Whatever its origin, the weapon is among the mightiest known to the Adeptus Astartes, capable of hewing through demons, armored vehicles, and even the greater monstrosities of the Tyranid hive fleets with equal ease. The Emperor's champion is not a position held for a lifetime. He serves for the duration of a single campaign or a single decisive engagement within one, and if he survives, he passes the blade and armor back to the Brotherhood to await the next chosen brother. More often than not, he does not survive. To be chosen is to be marked by destiny, and destiny is a harsh patron for warriors who already walk in the shadow of final sacrifice. Yet the honor is beyond measure, and generations of battle brothers have considered it the highest calling a Templar can ever receive. Many of the most famous heroes of the Brotherhood have wielded the ancient blade at some point in their careers, and the names of those who fell bearing it are inscribed on the hull of the flagship in letters of gold that are polished reverently by neophytes each cycle. Beyond the champion, the rank and file of the Brotherhood includes a wealth of specialized formations, each honed by 10,000 years of continuous combat. These sword brethren form the veteran elite, warriors who have proven themselves beyond all doubt, serving as personal guards to marshals and castellans, and often wielding power weapons, storm shields, or combi weapons of rare craftsmanship. Assault squads equipped with jump packs descend from the upper atmosphere in flaming arcs, their chain swords already whining for combat before their boots touch soil. Terminator armored veterans, each a peerless close combat specialist, teleport directly into enemy command centers to strike down commanders in moments of precise, breathtaking efficiency. Land raiders, predators, and the venerable Crusader pattern vehicles grind forward at the vanguard, their hulls draped in purity seals and campaign banners. Dreadnoughts, their ancient sarcophagi often containing warriors of truly legendary age, stride into battle chanting litanies through their external speakers, the sound of centuries of accumulated faith booming across the battlefield ahead of them. And then there's the thing that enemies, when they survive to speak of it, describe not as a battle tactic, but as a kind of holy madness. Above all of this stands the doctrine of righteous zeal, the spiritual state in which a Templar, upon witnessing a fallen brother, charges the enemy without thought of safety or survival. This is not blind wrath, and it is not a simple anger. It is faith weaponized, sharpened by centuries of ritual, into something close to an ecstatic state of combat. Entire campaigns have been described by Templar formations slipping into this sacred fury at the critical moment, their charges breaking armies that should, by every sober calculation, have been immovable. It is terrifying to witness, and still more terrifying to face. Enemy commanders who have survived encounters with the Brotherhood describe the moment a Templar line breaks into the battle trance as the moment they knew their fight had been lost, regardless of the numbers on either side. To stand before such a charge is, for most foes, the final stand they will ever make. The armories also hold weapons of greater and more specific note. The venerable Crusader pattern vehicles and the sacred banners carried into every major engagement are relics in their own right, each one tied to the campaigns in which it was first blessed. Relic blades, held by the most senior officers, bear the names of ancient duels and ancient foes. Even the bolters of the Brotherhood are often engraved with prayers and campaign markings that commemorate the wars in which they have spoken. Every piece of the chapter's weapon is, in some sense, a piece of its memory, and every warrior who takes up one of these relics takes up a fragment of the Eternal Crusade itself. Doctrine and relics alone do not write legends. Legends are written in fire and faith on broken worlds. And across 10,000 years, the sons of Sigismund have left some of the most striking, most beautiful, and most openly self-sacrificing chapters in all of Imperial history. Chapter 6: Fires of Endless War. The Brotherhood's history is written in campaigns. Each great march leaves behind its own name, its own relics, and its own roles of fallen heroes. To trace them all would require libraries of their own, kept only in the sealed stacks of the flagship. A few, however, stand above the rest, and even the wider Imperium remembers them. The earliest campaigns were waged against these scattered remnants of the traitor legions during the Long Scouring. For generations, the Knights of Dorne's Fire hunted warbands of the Wordbearers, the Night Lords, and the Alpha Legion across the stars, clashing repeatedly with the Sons of Lorgar and Kurz. Through relentless attrition and an absolute refusal to accept surrender or parley from the forces of chaos, they reclaimed dozens of Imperial worlds and secured their reputation as an unyielding sword of retribution. The founder himself led portions of these early marches, remaining ever watchful, above all, over the Cadian Gate, where he rightly suspected the traitors would one day return in force. And then, in the 39th millennium, a single campaign would stretch the Brotherhood to its limit, bury it in its own dead, and give the Imperium a battle tank that even chapters with no love for the Templars still build their own copies of today. It began with a scream for faith. As Codex Black Templars records, in its Gerlas entry, the long isolated Gerlas system had been rediscovered by the Imperium in order to return to the fold. Gerlas refused. When the Adeptus Ministorum sent missionaries to bring the system back to the Creed, the people of Gerlas put those missionaries to the sword and threw their heads from the spires of their hives as answer. That answer was heard on the fleet decks of the Eternal Crusader. The Gerlas Crusade was launched under the command of High Marshal Ludoldus, a veteran of the earlier, storied Vinculus Crusade, and its opening months went the way most Templar campaigns began. The surrounding worlds fell swiftly, one after another, beneath the weight of a full Templar deployment. The fleet arrived at Gerilas itself, expecting another fast victory. What they met on the surface broke that expectation on a single night. Gerilas was a hive world, and its hives had been fortified, by the locals' own boast, according to plans drawn by Rogal Dorn himself during the Great Crusade. Whether that claim was true, or only a legend the defenders had come to believe, the walls held like Dornian walls. Repeated assaults ended in failure again and again. Dozens of brothers died climbing ramparts that would not fall, and each fresh attempt only added more black armor dead to the walls. Month after month, the Brotherhood threw itself at spires that simply refused to collapse. The losses mounted in a way the chapter had not known since the Scouring. Crusader squads that had served together for 100 years came apart in single days of close-quarters combat against entrenched Geralin defenders. Dreadnoughts were lost in the lower hives when their sarcophagi failed under sustained heavy fire. Entire breaches were filled with Templar dead, and still the spires stood. For a Brotherhood whose entire way of war is built around fast, decisive assault, the stalemate at Gerilas was its own kind of torture. Ludaldus is said to have stood on the bridge of the flagship and demanded, in open council, whether the chapter had ever truly faced walls that would not fall. The turning point came not from a fresh assault, but from a forgotten hive vault. During one of the Brotherhood's few successful local breaches, the artificer Sigismund and his forge masters entered a seal mechanicus chamber abandoned since the Great Crusade. Inside lay techno-arcana predating the heresy, patterns and schemata that the Templar forge masters had never seen, and the defenders had never known they possessed. From that discovery, Sigismund built something new, a vehicle whose line-breaking charge, assault ramps, and storm of short-range fire were designed from the first principles to do exactly what the Brotherhood had spent years failing to do at Gerilas. The first Land Raider Crusader rolled off the line under a banner of Templar black. Its assault profile shattered the first Geralin gate in a single engagement. The second fell within a week. The spires that had stopped 4 consecutive sieges fell one by one before a pattern of vehicles the enemy had no doctrine for and no answer to. By the end of the campaign, the world was restored to the Emperor's fold. Sigismund's pattern was being transcribed for later production, and a tank whose name the Brotherhood had earned in its own blood was entering service across the wider Adeptus Astartes. The Crusader pattern stands to this day as a living monument to Templar will, and it is no accident that the chapter named it for the campaign that nearly broke them. Yet no campaign in the entire modern Imperium is remembered the way Helsreach is remembered, and no name within the Brotherhood is spoken more respectfully than the one that came out of it alive. The most famous campaign of the modern Imperium is the role the Brotherhood played in the Third War for Armageddon, when the Ghazghul Mag Uruk Thraka, the Beast of Armageddon, the Orc warlord who had long promised return, came back to the Hive World with his green tide. Commissar Yarrick called upon every available Imperial force to hold the line against what was at once recognized as the greatest Orc offensive of the modern era. Among those who answered were the sons of Sigismund under High Marshal Helbrecht himself, who dispatched 3 full war hosts totaling some 900 Astartes to the war zone. They fought in every major theater, from the Ash Wastes to the equatorial jungles. But because Helsreach became the point where the defense had to hold or break, it was there that the chapter cemented its most beloved legend of the modern age. There, Reclusiarch Merrick Grimaldus led a token force of just 100 warriors, supported by the Armageddon Steel Legion, the Titans of Legio Invigilata, and later the Sisters of Battle of the Order of the Argent Shroud, against a greenskin horde of millions. The fighting there was a siege unlike any other. Grimaldus refused to be relieved, refused to retreat, and refused to let the city fall without the enemy paying a cost of generational significance. By the time the survivors fell back to the temple of the Emperor Ascendant for a final stand, only 35 brothers remained. It was there that the Reclusiarch bellowed the line that has since passed into Imperial legend, that he had dug his grave in that place, and that he would either triumph or he would fall. The battle ended when the temple itself collapsed under the pressure of the fighting, burying defenders and attackers alike. A day later, the priests emerged from the rubble one of the last surviving Templars of his war host, carrying the last relics of the shrine with him. The sacrifice proved decisive. It held the Horde at bay long enough for Armageddon's volcanic season of fire to force the invaders to pause, and the young chaplain emerged as the hero of Helsreach, a living saint of the Brotherhood whose words are still repeated by battle brothers on distant worlds. Yet not every campaign ends in a legend the Imperium remembers. Some end with warriors the Brotherhood refuses to speak of out loud because no one knows where or how they died. Other campaigns speak of different facets of Templar character. Marches against the Tau Empire have seen the Brotherhood reject every offer of parley from the young Xenos race, answering every diplomatic envoy with righteous fire and silencing Tau propaganda broadcasts by destroying the transmitters and their operators alike. Where other Imperial forces have sometimes hesitated before the Tau's apparent reasonableness, the sons of Sigismund recognized the philosophy known as the greater good for what it truly was, a heresy elegantly disguised, a more seductive and therefore more dangerous foe than open barbarism, and they answered it as they answer all heresies, with the sword. Far to the galactic north, past the last beacons of the Astronomicon, the ghoul stars turn slowly in the dark. Their name alone tells the Imperium what lives there. This is a region of collapsed stars, restless Necron dynasties, warp predators older than any Imperial record, and things for which Imperial scholars have never agreed on a common name. Very few Imperial forces go there, fewer come back whole. The Brotherhood goes there anyway. A young Helsreach, long before his ascension to High Marshal, earned his earliest reputation in the Ghoul Stars, leading a war host against the Scythor Fiends in a campaign whose account remains sealed to outside eyes. Other marshals have followed. Each departure was treated as any Templar deployment was treated. Banners were raised, oaths were sworn before Sigismund's tomb, a chaplain blessed each blade, and a war host slipped into the warp bound for coordinates most navigators refused to plot. Many returned bloodied, diminished, often unwilling to speak of what they had seen, bearing relics and prisoners, and new horrors added to the chapter's private chronicles. Others did not return. A war host would vox its arrival in the void between stars. Weeks would pass before the vox went quiet. A month later, an astropathic message might arrive, fragmented, sometimes cut off mid-word. Then nothing. No wreckage, no distress beacon recovered, no survivor ever in any of the recorded cases, only silence and an empty name on a list kept in the Reclusium. The Brotherhood does not formally mark such war hosts as lost. Their oaths are held by the Books of Sacrifice in the assumption that they are, somewhere out in that darkness, still trying to keep them. Every chapter reckoning that deals with the Ghoul Stars includes a count of these missing marches, a count that grows by at least one every few centuries, and that has not once, across 10 millennia, been resolved by a returning warrior. Entire generations of Templars were born, raised, and fell in ignorance of what happened to the brothers their fleets sent into the darkness before them. On certain cloister vigils, the missing names are read aloud by the Reclusiarch, and the assembled brothers stand for each one, as if the warrior himself might still hear. It is one of the oldest weights the Brotherhood carries, and it is a weight the outside Imperium almost never sees. It is also a weight that no High Marshal, including Helsreach himself, has ever ordered the chapter to set down. The campaigns along the Cadian Gate during the 13th Black Crusade saw the Knights of Dorn's Fire fighting alongside the defenders of Cadia, and some of their warriors were among the last to hold the line before the planet's shattering. Survivors, bearing relics they had sworn to save from the fall, rejoined the flagship in the aftermath, and their banners now hang among the most holy treasures of the fleet. Each of these wars contributes to the mosaic of the chapter's identity. Taken together, they do not paint a portrait of a static military force defending static holdings. They paint a portrait of a living, moving tide of war, forever pressing against the galaxy's darkest shores, forever receding, only to return once more with fresh purpose. That is the Eternal Crusade in practice, and that is what these warriors truly are. Yet behind every campaign, behind every banner, stands a line of warriors whose names are only spoken in hushed tones, and some of those names, once you have heard them, you do not forget. Chapter 7. Heroes beneath the Black Banner. To list every hero of the Brotherhood would demand a chronicle longer than this one, yet a handful of names stands above all others. Their deeds preserved in the Books of Honor and in the songs sung between warp jumps when the fleet is at rest. These warriors form the living myth of the chapter, the saints and champions against whom every new generation of Battle Brothers measures itself. The founder himself, naturally, stands at the apex of that pantheon. Sigismund is venerated with an intensity that approaches godhood, rivaled perhaps only by the worship paid to the master of mankind himself. His sarcophagus aboard the flagship is the spiritual heart of the Brotherhood, and his deeds during the heresy and scouring are recounted in full by every chaplain to every neophyte during the rite of induction. Above his tomb burns an eternal flame that has been carried from flagship to flagship across 10 millennia without ever going out. Before that flame, every High Marshal renews the chapter's vow upon his ascension, and before that flame, every Emperor's champion receives the Black Sword from the hands of the Reclusiarch. The first High Marshal is, in every practical sense, still leading the Brotherhood. The warriors who carry out his war simply carry it out in his absence, and if the founder is the saint the Brotherhood worships, Helsreach is the living king who fights in his name, and he has fought for longer than most worlds have been settled. Within the modern era of the Imperium, no figure looms larger than High Marshal Helsreach. He has held his office for several centuries by the accounting of outside observers, leading the Brotherhood through the Third War for Armageddon, the campaigns against the Scythor Fiends and the Ghoul Stars, the catastrophic losses of the Great Rift, and the reunification of its scattered war hosts in the Indomitus era that followed. He is famed for his command presence, for a political intransigence that has seen him clash repeatedly with Lord Commander Guilliman on matters of faith and doctrine, and above all for his personal skill at arms. He wields the Sword of the High Marshals, a master-crafted blade said to contain fragments of the very weapon Rogal Dorn carried aboard the Vengeful Spirit in the final hours of the Siege of Terra, borne by every Supreme Commander of the chapter since the founder himself ordered it so, and the Combi Melta ferocity. He is a warrior king in the truest sense, a figure who shows both the strict nobility of the Imperial Fist bloodline and the fierce devotion of his own chapter. Following his meeting with Guilliman, the current master of the Brotherhood became one of the first of his chapter to cross the Rubicon Primaris, ensuring that he could continue to lead his warriors in person for centuries more. To fight beside him is considered, among Templars, to fight in the presence of living history. Reclusiarch Grimaldus, the hero of Helsreach, is perhaps the most beloved of the modern heroes. Once a promising young chaplain under the tutelage of his predecessor in the Reclusium, he rose to spiritual prominence after surviving a series of campaigns that claimed every senior priest around him. Before the Armageddon War, he had already been marked out as the youngest warrior in chapter history to be raised to the rank of Sword Brother. At the Hive Mind, he commanded a token force of Battle Brothers and a coalition of Imperial Guard and Adeptus Sororitas warriors in a stand that has passed into Imperial legend across dozens of sectors. He survived against all odds, rose through the ranks in the aftermath, and now serves as one of the Brotherhood's most respected voices on matters of faith, discipline, and proper conduct of a campaign. His 3 Cenobite servitors, each bearing a sacred relic recovered from the ruined hive, are a visible symbol of the chapter's layered history, a walking reminder that the fallen are never truly gone, so long as their oaths still wait to be fulfilled. Not every hero bears a living face. Some of the Brotherhood's deadly warriors have not drawn breath in 10,000 years, and when they wake, the galaxy is warned. Marshal Ricard of the Damaris Crusade stands as an example of the campaign leaders who wage vital wars at the chapter's fringes. Though less famous in the wider Imperium than the Warrior King, his reputation within the Brotherhood itself is immense. He was one of the first marshals summoned to Armageddon when the campaign began, bringing his war host to bear in the earliest phases of the war. His patience, his refusal to accept anything less than complete resolution, and his willingness to press campaigns through shattered warp routes and dying systems mark him as a model of Templar virtues at their most focused. Among the ancient dead who still walk, the venerable dreadnought Tancred stands singular, laid within his armored sarcophagus after suffering mortal wounds at the Battle of Carrion Gulf. He has since fought across many great Templar campaigns, his spirit enduring within the ceramite shell long after his mortal body had passed beyond recovery. He wields a pair of titanic dreadnought close combat weapons and roars ancient battle hymns through his external speakers in a voice younger Templars describe as the sound of an entire age speaking at once. Younger warriors regard him in awe, older veterans with something closer to reverence. When the old hero is woken for battle, and he is not woken lightly, or the strain on his ancient form grows each cycle, it is universally understood that the fight will matter, and that failure will not be tolerated. And then, there are the Emperor's champions, an unbroken line of warriors chosen across 10,000 years to bear the black sword into the heart of the foe. Most of their names are remembered only within the Brotherhood's private chronicles, but a few have broken into the wider imperial consciousness. Among the most revered of the ancient generations is Champion Bayard, who fell at the temple of the Emperor Ascendant during the Battle of Helsreach, giving his final sacrifice so that the Reclusiarch and the last defenders might hold the line. Each champion's story is a bead on a very long rosary, a rosary that is, by design, still being made, and will continue to be made until the last enemy of mankind is cast into the void. Beyond these great names stands 1,000 other heroes whose deeds are known only to the Brotherhood itself. Brother sergeants who held breaches against impossible odds, apothecaries who preserved the gene seed of fallen warhosts at the cost of their own lives, tech marines who coaxed reluctant relic machines to fire one last round before their mechanisms failed, and neophytes raised to initiate in the middle of battle with their armor still marked by the foes that earned them their promotion. The chapter remembers each of them, and each of them in the end is remembered for the same essential thing, the keeping of a vow. Yet every legend on this list lived in an Imperium that no longer exists. The sky itself has been torn in half, and what has been done to these warriors, and what it has demanded of them, is a story still being written in black and fire. Chapter 8. The Flame That Endures. The modern age of the Imperium is an age of disaster. The birth of the Great Rift, the titanic warp scar that tore the galaxy in half at the close of the so-called 13th Black Crusade, plunged half of mankind's domain into the Imperium Nihilus, cut off from the light of the Astronomicon and besieged on every side by horrors uncounted. The fall of Cadia, the rise of the Despoiler's renewed war machine, the demonic tide spilling from the Eye of Terror, the emergence of new and terrible Tyranid hive fleets. These events broke the Imperium in ways from which it may never fully recover, and within that darkness, where entire chapters broke, fled inward, or simply went silent, the sons of Sigismund did the only thing they have ever done. They pressed on. Where other brotherhoods wavered, grieved, or turned inward in the face of catastrophe, the Templars simply did what they've always done. Part of that endurance came with the advent of the Primaris Space Marines, the new breed of Astartes engineered across millennia of patient labor by the long-working Archmagos Belisari's call at the behest of Rabute Guilliman. When the Lord Commander returned, and the Great Reclamation was launched to reclaim what could be saved of the shattered Imperium, entire formations of Primaris warriors were offered to chapters across the galaxy. The Brotherhood received them with a complicated welcome. On the one hand, the High Marshal and his marshals recognizing these warriors in answer to the grievous losses the chapter had sustained during the Great Rift. On the other hand, the new breed had been built by a Mechanicus Archmagos using knowledge drawn in part from ancient sources. Sources some within the Brotherhood regarded with deep suspicion, given their long-standing aversion to anything that smelled of the warp or of heresy hidden within progress. In the end, the chapter accepted the new warriors, but on its own terms, as it has always accepted everything. The Primaris Marines inducted into the Brotherhood were brought fully into its faith and traditions from the moment of their transfer. They swore the great vow of the founder, observed the rites of the Emperor's champion, and took up the armor and the cross-patay as their own. Today, it is not uncommon to see Primaris-sized Crusader squads striding beside older firstborn veterans. The old and the new fuse seamlessly by a shared creed that simply refuses to distinguish between them. Helsreach himself crossed the Rubicon Primaris, setting the example his sons would follow. The chapter's total numbers, already massive by Codex standards, have swollen still further in the years since the Great Reclamation began. and the new warhosts have been dispatched across the Imperium Nihilus to bring what aid they can to the isolated worlds of the dark half of the galaxy. Yet the peace between the Warrior King and the returned Primarch is a knife edge, and both of them know exactly which hand the blade is pointed at. The relationship between the High Marshal and the Lord Commander Guilliman is at best a working peace, and Codex Black Templars reflects that tension in its modern era entries. Helbrecht insists upon the Emperor's divinity. Guilliman rejects such claims and finds them troubling. The Master of the Brotherhood refuses the Codex Astartes, and Guilliman has tolerated that non-compliance in a galaxy too broken for internal war. For the moment, both warrior kings are too practical, and the enemy too uncontrollable on too many fronts for such conflicts to go further. They stand together because the alternative is unthinkable, and both of them know it. Meanwhile, the campaigns press on. Templar warships move through shattered warp routes, guided by navigators through storms that should be impassable. They answer distress calls that older, more cautious chapters ignore, often arriving at worlds whose inhabitants had long since abandoned hope of rescue. They hurl themselves against Chaos warbands, Ork Waz, Tyranid splinter fleets, Necron awakenings, and Drakari raiders in equal measure, refusing to recognize any single enemy as more worthy of attention than another. They plant banners on worlds that have not seen an Imperial standard in millennia. They recruit from the populations they rescue and the populations they punish alike, gathering fresh aspirants wherever their fleet drops out of the warp. And they carry with them the single unbroken line of the Founder's Oath, the vow that the last of their enemies will be overcome before they rest, and that they will not rest before that day. Beyond the Black Banner stands the wider Adeptus Astartes, its full hierarchy from aspirant to chapter master explained. And yet, within that brotherhood moves a darker, quieter order drawn from every chapter and answering only to the Inquisition. If you want to see where that leads, the Death Watch is waiting.